Good morning and welcome. I'm Hamp Johnston, President and CEO of Rockpoint Bank. This is one of my favorite events. I always appreciate Dr. Altig's perspective and commentary, and we also have an impressive list of community leaders, including Representative Fleischman, on the agenda. Rockpoint Bank is excited to be the presenting sponsor. The bank is managed, owned, and headquartered here in Chattanooga, and we're looking forward to celebrating our 5th anniversary next month in March. We're also looking forward to serving local businesses and professionals for years to come. Before introducing Dr. Altig, I want to recognize and thank the other sponsors that make this event possible. Our platinum sponsors, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, EPB, and our gold sponsors, Chattanooga Airport, First Horizon, Food City, PNC Construction, Pinnacle Financial Partners, Opella, Truist, Unum, and Volkswagen Chattanooga. We'd also like to thank the Westin for hosting us in this great space. Let's all give our sponsors a round of applause. As I mentioned earlier, we're here today to hear from some very smart people about the future of our economy at the global, national, and local levels. Starting with Dr. David Altig, Executive Vice President and Chief Economic Advisor at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, not quite Chattanooga. He serves on the leadership team for the bank's strategic priority to address economic mobility and resilience and advises the Economic Leadership Committee. With decades of experience in both academic and professional settings, Dr. Altig uses a deep understanding of the systems that underpin our modern economy to make complex subjects relatable. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Altig.
Thanks. Morning. Nice to be back. Always nice to be back. I kind of generally try to start these things off with some sort of little story or something that relates to the presentation. This one, title, Deja Vu All Over Again. So, you know, the problem I had this time was that my clever tank has run dry a little bit. And I have been here so many times that I was just reminded, I think 2015 was the first time I kind of did this event, or an event like this. And I can't really recycle my own material. That's not going to work. So I did what everybody does these days when you kind of gotta make something up that you can't come up with out of your own head. I went to ChatGPT. And I said, give me some sort of clever, interesting anecdote about Yogi Berra's famous quip, deja vu all over again. And the response I got back was, I think you've asked me that question before. It actually got it completely wrong, because the first thing it says, well, this was not really a Yogi Berra quip. It was a quip by the comedian Stephen Wright. I said, that's not right. That's not correct. And then ChatGPT came back and said, oh, you're right. It wasn't. Stephen Wright did have a pretty good one. He said, I'm suffering from amnesia and deja vu at the moment, and I think I've forgotten this before. But it turns out that Yogi Berra actually did disavow making that quote, said, I never said half the things I said. And he later in life, though, embraced it when he realized that everyone enjoyed it. So I don't know. ChatGPT suffers from deja vu as well, and use it at your own risk. Maybe we'll see that a little bit later. I chose this title because I went back and looked at my presentation from last year. And it turns out I'm talking about exactly the same stuff. Last year, when what the theme was a bunch of developments in the economy, developments in the environment more generally, that were puzzling or that were creating puzzles about how to interpret what's going on and what's likely to happen. So we're a year away from that. You'd think I would have some answers to those very same questions. We'll see. But they are still vexing us, and they have to do with productivity, they have to do with immigration, they have to do with tariffs, they have to do with all of the stuff that we knew was going to be a problem and hope was going to be resolved over the course of the year, and it kind of didn't exactly happen. There's still things that we're puzzling over, although maybe we have a few more answers. So if I could get the slides up. So here's 2025. Didn't really understand how puzzling 2025 was going to be at the time. This is GDP growth by quarter. So about the time that we were meeting here last year, the first quarter of 2025, the economy was shrinking according to the official GDP statistics. Didn't know that. And even when we knew it, we kind of realized we didn't know it because the whole year, or at least the first 3 quarters of the year, were completely distorted by the tariffs and the reaction of businesses to the tariffs. The whole reason that GDP was negative in the first quarter of last year is because you folks were front-running the tariffs. So there was a big burst in import activity, which sort of drove down the official statistics, and it was a complete illusion. There was nothing like weakness in the economy that reflected. And of course, we came screaming back over the next couple of quarters. We're going to get fourth quarter GDP tomorrow, so I don't know what it's going to be. There's a guess by a bunch of economists, the blue chip forecast, and it looks like something that will represent the average for the entire year, something a bit over 2%, and that's probably about where we're going to come in for the year. It was a nice, steady year. There were some interesting elements of it. If you break down sort of where the growth was coming from, this is consumer spending, that's kind of the red stuff. Business investment spending, that's the green stuff. So business investment spending started out strong. That, again, was front-running the tariffs. In the first quarter, I think equipment on computer-related stuff grew at an annualized rate of over 60%. So I'm assuming most of that came from China. I don't know exactly, but that was basically, again, the tariff impacts. That kind of dwindled over the course of the year, but the consumer just kept getting stronger and stronger. If you were in the residential investment space, my condolences. It was not a great year, but overall, it was a very satisfactory year in terms of growth in the economy. And if you ask the members of the Federal Open Market Committee, we did. There's their answer for what growth is going to look like next year, the year after, and the year after that. This is from the summary of economic projections we do every quarter. That dashed red line is what they think normal is. So they're kind of anticipating slightly better than normal growth going forward, with really very few signs of any reversal of that. I think if you ask them what 2025, this is from December, so I think if you ask them what 2025 will come out as, they would give you a higher number than what they were thinking of in December. Certainly I would. And maybe some of that bounce back for this year, which embedded kind of a negative effect from the government shutdown, which will be reversed in the early part of this year, maybe that will be muted a little bit. Some of this is the one big beautiful bill, copyright. Some of it is the kind of, again, just the timing of the effects of the government shutdown. But it looks good, and thus far we've heard nothing to to bounce us off of these forecasts. So if this is all I had to worry about as a Federal Reserve official, I would go home and relax, get the bourbon out, and find something to replace my football fix for the next couple of months. Unfortunately, this is not the only thing we have to worry about. In fact, this isn't even the primary thing we have to worry about. We don't have a mandate to maximize growth or maximize sustainable growth in the economy. We have a mandate to maximize employment at its sustainable long-term rate and to get inflation down to 2%. This story is not nearly as pleasant as the last slide and more puzzling than the last slide, although the last slide is puzzling enough because of the employment picture. So here's what kind of employment has looked like over the last couple of years. The red box is just basically the last year, and there is a very clear story if you ignore kind of the last report, which was surprisingly hot, but also 1 month, it'll get revised. We're not getting excited about it. Still think that the story is a pretty substantial weakening in the pace of job growth in the U.S. economy. So really, over most of the last half of 2025, we bounced around between creating about 40 to 50, 60,000 private sector jobs, this is the private sector, a month. Now, if you had asked me 2 years ago, if you had asked me before the pandemic, how would you react to the U.S. economy creating 40 to 50, 60,000 jobs a month, I would say we've got a problem. Something's not working right. We are not on course to meet our mandate to promote maximum sustainable employment. It would mean rate cuts, it could mean all sorts of reactions to that, but it would be symptomatic of poor performance and something to worry about. Well, I'm not so sure. And I'm not so sure for a reason that I pointed out last year, actually. Something has happened to the U.S. labor supply and happened rapidly, and I don't know if it was anticipated or unanticipated, but it was major, and that has to do with immigration. So this is southwest border crossings, encounters. So an encounter is exactly what it sounds like. Homeland Security meets someone at the border. Maybe they're chasing them, but that's actually not typically the case. What's typically the case is they cross, they present themselves to Homeland Security, and they make a request for asylum, and then they're given a court date, and then, in many cases, a work permit or the opportunity to obtain a work permit. This was the major driver of the labor market now going back 5 years. So this goes back to the end of 2021. These are fiscal years because this is the way the data is reported. So 2021 is the kind of the beginning there. There were 165,000 border encounters per month at that time. Compare that to the sort of pre-pandemic average, that would have been about 65,000. So we'd already doubled. We peaked at 300,000 people coming across the border per month. 2.5, 3 million new people. That changed. It began to change during the Biden administration. You can kind of see the fairly significant drop off of that peak, down to now virtually zero. This has basically come to a halt. The population consequences of this, which I also pointed out last year, but this is a revised picture of that. This is from the Congressional Budget Office last month. This is their January report, so this is very recent. And they've been significantly changing their view of how many people are in the United States. So you can see the population boom post-2019. It's not the blue part of those bars. The blue part of the bars is us, native births, less deaths. It was all the orange part, which is the immigration piece. So I probably said this last year, you know, we first looked at it, go, well, 2020, yeah, that's the pandemic. We're all locked in our houses, we're bored. Of course there was a population boom, but that wasn't the story. The story was people coming into the country. And now it's gone. So why does this matter, and why am I torturing you with this? It matters because these are workers. This is population, but this maps into the supply of workers in the U.S. economy. And that supply of workers into the U.S. economy helps to inform what normal employment growth should look like. So here's a few calculations. If you go back to the congressional budget, so here's how we figure out what normal is. Our basic calculation for what normal job growth is to ask that question that's up there. How many jobs does the U.S. economy have to create every month on net to keep the unemployment rate from rising or falling, for that matter? So in 2024, according to the most recent Congressional Budget Office numbers, there were basically what's that number? 3.3 million immigrants coming into the country. That's both authorized and unauthorized. Authorized just means through the usual visa process, but unauthorized is the bigger part of that, obviously. And adding a couple of assumptions like what's the labor force participation rate of immigrants, what's the age distribution of the immigrants coming in so that we can map population growth into labor supply, the calculation you would end up with is normal employment growth would be about 120,000 jobs a month, which is probably closer to what I would have said, 2 years ago, even without the immigration picture. Maybe something a little bit lower, maybe closer to 100,000 or something like that. But that would be the number. Measured against 40 to 50,000 jobs per month that we created in most of 2025, that's a very high number. We're getting no close to where we should be. But, of course, in 2025, there weren't 3.3 million immigrants. There was, according to the CBO current estimates, again, these are estimates, we don't really know, 400,000 new immigrants came into the country, less however many left. If that's the number, then under the same set of assumptions, normal employment growth would imply about 30,000 jobs a month. 30,000. So matched up against the 40 to 50 that we created, the labor market looks extraordinarily healthy. That's if the 400,000 is right. And there are estimates that suggest that number is too high. These folks here, Wendy Edelberg and her co-authors at the Brookings Institution, think the number is closer to zero and could be as low as minus 650,000. That is, more people left the country than came in. If that's the right number, then normal would be minus 11,000 jobs per month. We should be shedding jobs in the U.S. economy as a normal course of business. And in fact, looking forward, it's almost certainly the case, even the CBO thinks so, that 400,000 is overstated. It will be something closer to zero. So we could be confronted over the course of this year with a situation where I have to stand up in front of people and say, yeah, the labor market is, we're negative job growth. Don't worry about it. Well, please say your prayers for me at any point here, because that's not going to be a very well-received message, but it actually is the message that kind of has to be delivered. One implication of this is that the uncertainty over sort of this immigration picture still, both in terms of what has already happened and then certainly in terms of what's going to happen, means that the employment numbers are going to be like a zero guide. They're going to provide no guidance to how well the economy is doing at all. So we can look at other things. We do look at other things. One of them is the unemployment rate. So, to figure out what was normal, I sort of made this claim that what we do is we look at kind of, job growth that will keep the unemployment rate stable. So we can just look directly at the unemployment rate. It's pretty stable. I mean, it actually ticked up to something closer to normal over the course of the year, peaked out at 4.5%, and over the last several months has declined. Now, I don't know exactly how accurate this number is because, of course, we lost some data when the government shut down that we will never get back. So there's some guesswork here. But the guesswork is during that period where the unemployment rate was actually higher, not lower. So if anything, that might be an overstatement. So this is telling us the labor market looks reasonably healthy. We could look at job opportunities, job openings per the unemployment rate. So, we were just talking about this in with my colleagues yesterday. So if you want to see something negative about the labor market, there's your picture. It's about the only thing I can show you that is moving deliberately sort of downward. But that move is not very big. This is generally taken to be a pretty good measure of labor market tightness. Are there a bunch of openings relative to the number of unemployed people? And the answer is, relative to where we were a year ago or 2 years ago, no. I mean, it's pretty stable. Maybe a bit of softness, but we know that what that applies to is simply employers being currently in the space of saying, I'm not really shedding jobs, I'm not really adding jobs, I'm kind of on even keel. There are a bunch of interpretations of that. One interpretation is, well, there was a bit of overhiring coming out of the pandemic. We're right-sizing. Some of it is, well, let's wait and see how much of this AI stuff kind of helps us out. And some of it is just simply we are right-sized now. And so steady as you go. Rather than look at the quantities here, we could look at the prices to give us some idea of whether or not the labor market seems like it's roughly in balance. If wage growth is accelerating, I've said this many times, if wage growth is accelerating, then the labor market is kind of tight. Demand is exceeding supply. If the wages are growth is falling, then we kind of have excess workers around and we worry about labor market softness. None of that is happening. So the green line there is the pre-pandemic trend, just so you can kind of reference where inflation-adjusted wages, that's what this is, would be had the pandemic not taken place. We're still low relative to that, but we're catching up. If you look at the post-pandemic trend, that's the orange line, it's a little steeper than the green line, so slowly we're getting back to where we would have been had the pandemic never happened with respect to workers' inflation-adjusted wages. So there's clear inflation effect. It wasn't good. You can tell why everybody's angry. in this picture, but it's improving and likely to improve over time. More to the point, there's nothing in this picture that suggests the labor market is out of balance. And when we talk about the Fed's employment mandate, that's the issue. Is the labor market in balance or is it out of balance? Is supply exceeding demand with respect to workers? Nothing is telling us that that's the case. I should have prefaced all this by noting that there has been an unusual amount of disagreement at the Federal Open Market Committee over the past year, particularly over the past half year. And you had not unheard of situation, but an unusual situation where people are dissenting from the interest rate decision and dissenting in different directions. Some people saying when we were doing the cuts at the end of last year, we should have cut more. So I disagree with 25 basis point reduction in the policy rate. And some people saying we should not be cutting at all. Those who were disagreeing and said we needed to be more aggressive were looking at these pictures I just showed you and saying, no, I don't agree with you, Dave. The labor market is weak and likely to weaken further, and we need to do something to support employment growth in the economy. The other people were looking at a different set of pictures, and that different set of pictures have to do with inflation. So the inflation story, its base is pretty simple. Here's, now this only goes back through, I think it says September, but I think this is October. But because we don't have kind of more recent data on our inflation statistics out of the government shutdown, all of that got delayed. We have a bunch of CPI reports, which are much more recent, but I'm not going to show you those because I don't believe them. Because here's what the Bureau of Labor Statistics does when it reports the Consumer Price Index. You know, they're going out and they're looking at prices of individual items and they're saying, what was the price last month? What's the price this month? If they can't find the price this month, they say, oh, inflation was 0 for that good or service. Well, they do that all the time, by the way. That's kind of their standard process. It usually doesn't matter much because usually they can sort of match the individual prices. But when you have no data on a bunch of stuff because you shut down the collection process, you're putting zeros everywhere. So out of October into November, the prices were, the inflation statistic was distorted way to the downside. And then it came screaming back when you started to get data. It's just too messy. Trying to fix it, which we do, just leads us to this picture. And this picture is telling a very clean story. I've got the blue line, that's the year-over-year inflation rate on the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, which is what defines the 2% goal. I've got some measures of core, which sort of help us kind of try to understand, if we take out some of the month-to-month noise, where are things headed? They all tell us the same thing. We have been stuck for 2 years, basically, above our 2% target. So some people, important people making important decisions, say, well, that is just basically a problem. And we cannot sit on our hands and allow the rate of inflation to persistently run, 0.75 of a percentage point above our 2% objective. We are not meeting our goal. So stop cutting those rates. Then you got other people saying, well, no, wait a minute. 2025, look, Dave, I was listening to you. You said at the beginning, 2025 was infected by all sorts of tariff stuff. That's the inflation numbers as well as everything else, and that will fade away. And there may be some truth to that. If I separate kind of the inflation rate between goods and services, we would expect to see tariffs show up in the red line there, goods. We would not really expect to see tariffs show up so much in services inflation. That's the blue line. So there probably is something to this story that we have elevated rates of inflation, particularly through last year and then maybe into this year for a while because of the tariffs. So you got people who interpret this picture that way who say, okay, we should just look through that. It'll all work out. Everything will be fine. I'm worried about the labor market. Let's cut rates and cut them more aggressively. There are other people, though, who say, well, wait a minute. Services are also higher than they were. The rate of inflation on services is higher than that blue line there. That blue line is sort of what the average services inflation rate was when we were actually hitting our 2% target. You may remember that all the period between the global financial crisis and the pandemic, we actually weren't hitting our 2% target. And we were obsessing over rates of inflation that were too low. We were probably the only ones obsessing over it, but we were obsessing over it. We actually hit 2% during the period between 1995 and about 2005. So that's where those trend, those average lines, the red line for goods and the blue line for services come from. So I can look at that and I can say one of two things. I can say, yeah, I see the tariffs and that's the thing to worry about. I can look at this and I can say, yeah, but I also see a services problem. It's not coming down very quickly to levels that I think are consistent with meeting our 2% target. Hence the fight. Hence the disagreement. Is that people are looking at exactly the same stuff, but the stuff is not screaming to you about what the right answer is. One of the things we're a bit worried about in Atlanta is that this goods inflation, which we actually do think, there's a tariff story there, but it's not a tariff story that's going to go away very quickly. We get that from businesses, and there was a Wall Street Journal article just the other day. It said both small businesses, big businesses have said, we held back on passing through the elevated cost associated with what's going on tariffs and other things. We're not holding back anymore. 2026 is the year we're catching up and protecting our margins. So that's a concern. The other concern is the tariffs are a piece of a much bigger picture about reconfiguring supply chains and reconfiguring the means of production fundamentally. That stuff doesn't happen fast, and it doesn't happen cheaply. So will I be surprised if over time we have this tariff story, these elevated goods inflation story with this for some time, and you can only go so far before you can say that's nothing to worry about. Eventually, a series of temporary things become permanent. So that again, hence the fight. There are lots of things you could push back on those stories. They're concerns. They're things that we don't know for sure are going to happen, and we just sort of have to now make a judgment, and everyone is making their own judgment. It is worse than that. Because even if we could agree on what the state of the labor market was, even if we could agree on what the inflation picture looks like, it would be entirely unclear what to do about it. Here's another AI portion of the presentation. This is I asked Claude to give me a graphic of someone scratching their head about where interest rates are headed in the long run. So this is what Claude gave me. Now, actually, it's kind of the animation there. It actually taught me how to program that. So it taught me how to kind of take this thing and program it. So now I look at this and I say, you can tell your kids this, if you're a programmer, you got a problem, because AI is going to kind of take your job. If you're a graphic designer, don't worry. Because this guy sucks. Now, to be fair, this is Claude 4.0. And so now we're at least up to 4.5. I think that's the one I'm using now. So I did it again. I asked him to exactly the same question, thinking for sure they have progressed. But they've actually regressed. I don't understand. I don't understand how it went backwards. In any event, we're scratching our head about where interest rates are headed in the long run. So again, remember the premise of this. The premise of this is if you think labor markets are weakening and inflation is going to take care of itself as the effect of tariffs roll off, then you're more inclined to say, yeah, we ought to be lowering interest rates back down to their normal level. If you think inflation is the bigger problem and the labor market is sort of on even keel and there's all this immigration stuff which is making the labor market maybe look weak, but it's really not, then you say, no, we ought to be, at the very least, holding interest rates constant. So let's assume we can agree on which one of those things is the right course of action. It still requires you to say, what is the normal, what is a neutral interest rate? What's the right interest rate we're shooting for? And there is no agreement on what that is. So this is from those summary of economic projections again. So in the summary of economic projections, all 19 people at the meeting have a vote. You know, here's what I think GDP is going to do. Here's what I think inflation is going to do. Here's what I think unemployment is going to do. And here are the interest rates that I think are consistent with those outcomes. So these are the votes in December of 2019. So the height of the bars is just the number of people who said that number. So 8 people said 2.5% on the federal funds rate is where we're going to end up down the road. It's kind of a guess of what neutral is. In fact, 70% of the respondents at the FOMC meeting said 2.5 or lower. There were only 17 at the time because there was one vacant governor spot and there was one president who refused to answer the question. So it's a stupid question. Why are you asking me that? There's 19 now, and here's what they said this December. They said, if you long for the days when interest rates were going to be in the mid-2s and mortgage rates were going to be in the 3s, sorry, not coming back. So today, 0 of these policymakers say we're headed to 2.5% or lower. 0. That's the one clear message from this vote, but it's the only clear message from this vote, because how much higher than 2.5%? I don't know. You certainly can't glean it from this chart. They are all over the map. So again, the point is they're disagreeing on whether the labor market or the inflation problem is the biggest one, and they're disagreeing on what the right rate should be, even if you knew which one was the bigger problem. I said I was going to answer some questions, maybe. I don't think I did. Did I? I can answer everyone can answer. The problem is everyone can answer these questions for themselves. We're not actually flying in the dark. We have stuff to look at, but they're very open to interpretation. This one has to do with long-term structural issues in the U.S. economy. So what drives interest rates in the long run? Well, basically the growth of the economy and then things like fiscal policy. So here's just sort of a mapping of the conventional wisdom. If you think you're going to get slower population growth, that slows down the rate of growth in the economy. That will generally mean lower interest rates. But if you think we're at the cusp of the AI boom, if not already in it, that raises productivity, that raises growth, and that raises interest rates. And then you have the fiscal policy issue, which garnered big news over the last couple weeks since the Congressional Budget Office came out with their new projections. And we know some stuff about this, but we don't know everything we need to know to sort out kind of the interest rate picture that I just showed you before. So here's one thing we know. Population growth is going in the tank. There will be, again, this is from the Congressional Budget Office, within 30 years, there will be zero population growth in the United States, according to the CBO. But also according to the CBO, within the next 3 years, the only thing that keeps this population growth positive is immigration, their assumption about what immigration is going to be. So they're assuming immigration is going to bounce back. That's some of the increase in population that you see over the first couple years of this chart. And then essentially it will begin to be swamped by the fact that native population growth is going to move to zero and then turn negative forever. Unless you can talk your chick kids into getting to work. Good luck. The point of this is, of course, there is a regulator on growth in the economy going forward, which is severe and serious. You cannot grow without workers, we don't think. And I'm going to push back on anybody who says we can because of AI. There is no technological revolution in the history of man that killed jobs on net. Kill some, you shift the types of jobs that you get, but you don't do away with the need for workers. So this is that, I'll skip over that. So maybe it is AI. So this is productivity in the U.S. economy, output per hour. It looks like we actually are having kind of a productivity boom. It jumped out of the pandemic. I've talked about this before. I mean, that was largely had to do with, stretching your resources basically as hard as you can because you can't get workers. But it's actually accelerated over the last several years. It's not AI, as far as we can tell. And as far as we can tell, comes from asking businesses, have you really kind of deployed this in a way that has fundamentally altered the productivity of your business? The answer we always get is, not yet. It's coming, we think, but not yet. What we know is that this is a result of a capital investment boom that we've experienced. So the AI element of that, which may largely bail us out, and if you look at the CBO projections, they're basically assuming that the population growth loss is going to be countered by some productivity gain, okay, at least over the next 10 years or so. That's good. But we don't really know. So we got one force of growth pushing down on the path of interest rates, one source probably pushing up on the path of interest rates, and we don't know what's going to win. And then finally, there's a fiscal policy part. I won't say too much about that, except that the CBO says, basically we're headed to, within 10 years, to the kind of highest debt to GDP ratio we've had. Over the next 30 years, we are really going to be kind of at levels that feel stratospheric. And there's a calculation from the Dallas Fed that translates kind of these debt levels into interest rates. And they certainly suggest, without a change in the path of fiscal policy in the United States, interest rates are headed north from where even probably we projected in those FOMC numbers. So again, I thought I was going to have more answers when I showed up. But if my bosses don't have answers that they can come to a conclusion, well, why should I, really? I mean, and thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Good morning. I have the honor of introducing Congressman Fleischman up to the stage just to make a few remarks. Before I do, I want to thank our elected officials that are here in the room. I know we have a representative from Senator Blackburn's office, so appreciate her and her team. She's been working hard for Chattanooga lately and pushed really hard with United Airlines, along with the rest of the federal delegation, which has added some new flights. So if you haven't booked on United to Houston or soon to Denver on weekday service or Newark, look up United Airlines next time you're headed out. And they didn't sponsor today, by the way, I should say that. And then I want to thank our elected officials from City Council and County Commission. If y'all would stand, please. I know we've got a few folks in the room. They are critical partners for us, and so I really want to thank them for all the support they give us around our economic development work. I am honored to have Congressman Fleischman here today. I think for many of you know him, but I'll just say he moved to Chattanooga after finishing law school and geared up a law practice here. Worked incredibly hard. His tenacity and his character allowed him to build that practice over 2 decades. In 2011, he won election to serve in the 3rd District in Congress, and of course represents 10 counties in East Tennessee, but home for him is Chattanooga, and so we greatly appreciate him and his time. He serves on the Appropriations Committee in the U.S. Congress, but he chairs the Energy and Water Subcommittee, and that role really has allowed him to drive federal investment in some of our key innovation partners here in Chattanooga, not the least of which is University of Tennessee at Chattanooga and EPB. And so his role around that has been critical for us. And as we talk more in the next session about competitiveness, his work is really allowing Chattanooga to be much more competitive and much more innovative. So thank you, Congressman, for being here today.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am the eternal optimist, so we're going to have a great day and we're going to have a great economy. I would say I have all of the answers, but I don't. But thank you for that wonderful presentation. That actually helps me to do my job. Thank you for the Chattanooga Area Chamber of Commerce. They are very modest. They are literally and have been awarded as the very best chamber of commerce in North America, not just in the United States, in North America. We have, yes, absolutely. Just a few weeks ago, I was in the Oval Office with President Trump and some other folks, and he signed a bill that I wrote. That bill received 419 votes on the House floor. Now, what does that mean? I think that means that we got it right. That was the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill for the country. Now, yes, we had to conference that with the United States Senate. They had about 80 votes over there for us, but we are working towards getting things right. So I come from the standpoint of being very thankful. Earlier this week, so many of my constituents, University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, EPB, our great utility, Erlanger, the city of Chattanooga, the greatest mid-sized city in America. I say, no, the greatest mid-sized city in the world, and this is home, so thank you. What did they say to me? I was humbled. They said, thank you. Okay, I was glad to see the Times Free Press there to actually write an article that I've done something in 16 years of worth. Thank you very much. I no longer have to go to Wolf Blitzer, CNN, MSNBC, and all those other progressive outlets to get my word out. But seriously, thank you for that very kind article. What do I do in Congress? I work hard every day. Why do I work hard? Because I've been given incredibly good hand. If you were playing poker, I think I got a royal flush. We've got folks like the Tennessee Valley Authority that I support as a Republican in its public domain. And we are going to do great things at TVA. We've got a new board. We're doing tremendous things, not only in nuclear, but in all energy. I support energy. The Energy and Water Bill, what does that do? That funds the Department of Energy. Why is that so important? Because up the road, there's a little place called Oak Ridge. I bring about $10 billion a year into that place. That's amazing. But Knoxville says, hey, that gives us about $50 billion worth of economic activity each year. A few years ago, President Obama sent Ernie Moniz to go see me, long time ago, and he said, let's get a national lab off of its parochial boundaries. Secretary Moniz came to me, and I said, yes, sir, Mr. Secretary, where in Chattanooga are we going to put it? And it went to EPB. So we're doing such tremendous things together. I can go into a classroom, whether it's at our great Southern Adventist University or UTC or UTK, Tennessee Wesleyan. My gosh, we've got great Lee University, and talk to young people. How could you not be optimistic about our future? These young people are tremendous. Yes, they've got all their gadgets. I'm old enough to remember to get excited when there was a fax machine, had that rolled up paper come out of it and said, hey, isn't this great? Okay, now young people say, what's a fax machine? So the bottom line is, in the short time we have together, there's no question we have a very polarized country, okay? And I respect that. I think our founding fathers wanted that. Did George Washington always agree with Thomas Jefferson? Of course not. Adams and Jefferson fought each other like cats and dogs, but at the end of the day, they came together for the good of the country. And that's really been my message to go out, whether I'm in East Tennessee, across our great state, all over the United States, and I'm not a parochial member of Congress. Yes, I'm an appropriator. I'm defense appropriations, labor, education, health and human services appropriations. We fund everything that's in the federal government. Now, how do I vote? I vote always to keep the federal government open, and I think we should always do that. When we shut it down for political reasons or otherwise, it hurts the economy. We just saw that. Keep the government open. Keep working through your political differences, but never hurt the American people. So do we have, some people would say, well, gee whiz, there's a little naivete in his speech, the reality of that. But the reality is I am out there every day talking to men and women on assembly lines, talking to students in classrooms, meeting with constituents. No, I'm not an absent congressperson. I'm one of the Republicans that only had there were 4 that had perfect voting records. Now, I tell those scientists up at Oak Ridge, who I love dearly, when they hear perfect voting records, they ask me, how did you get every vote right? Think about that. I said it was kind of tough, but I did it. The reality is, I'm going to leave you with this. We have the greatest chamber. We have the greatest assets right here. Our state is fiscally sound. I've been given a great hand with you all. Work with me. Work with me to take that Chattanooga model, that Tennessee model, that great American model all across this United States. I love all the charts. I respect the fact that we have issues and problems in this country, problems in this world. But I would literally stand with the United States of America any day of the week. And thank you for being your member of Congress. God bless you all.
Thank you, Congressman. Before I introduce Janet and Kim to the stage, I want to talk a little bit about why. And I appreciate Dr. Altig and the data and the information he shares with us. When you see that, a lot of that data, the reality is that has an impact on us, but it's an external impact, right? But I think Chattanoogans know that we chart our own destiny. And I think that's a really important thing for us to be thinking about right now as we think about the world we're in and we think about the world we want to be in. And so Chattanoogans know that we charted our own destiny when we reinvested in downtown. We changed a dying downtown into one that is so vibrant that when we had locals who wouldn't want to come downtown, now locals and millions of tourists are coming into our community, into downtown every year. We know that we chart our own destiny because the city and county invested more than $50 million in cold hard cash in Enterprise South before Volkswagen ever darkened our door. They invested that money in a brownfield site that was used to manufacture explosives during World War II and turned it into a site for Germany's largest company. That is an irony not lost on our friends at Volkswagen. That transition, right, between Volkswagen and their supply chain means that more than $500 million, more than $500 million of salaries is spent in our local economy every year. So we decided that was going to happen. We charted our own destiny. And the conversation that I'm really excited to have here with Kim and Janet is around what does our destiny look like next, right? So what's the focus going to be for us as we think about how we become competitive? So I want to thank our friends at the city, at the county, Benwood Foundation. They've allowed us to engage Newmark, which Kim leads their site selection team, to really look at how we build and make sure we continue to build a competitive regional economy, to make sure that we're creating economic opportunity for our citizens, that we're competitive when it comes to attracting great companies and great talent. And so that's really what this conversation is about and kind of where we're headed over the next few months with working with Newmark. So I appreciate our partners that are allowing us to do that. I will go ahead and introduce Janet and Kim. So for those of you that haven't met Janet Rehberg yet, Janet is the incoming president and CEO-elect for EPB. So Janet joined EPB to lead strategic initiatives, helping position Chattanooga for the future through long-term planning and innovative partnerships, including advancing commercially available quantum computing. So she is, before EPB, Janet served as Chief Strategy Officer and Vice President of Engineering at Tri-County Electric Co-op, and previously led grid modernization efforts at American Electric Power. She brings incredible experience in the utility strategy, innovation, and building infrastructure that supports economic growth. So excited to have Janet here. I'm going to ask her to come up on stage. And then also joining Janet is Kim Moore. Kim is a leader in economic development strategy with Newmark, which again we've engaged for this competitiveness study process. She heads the firm's economic incentives and advisory and economic development consulting practices. Since joining Newmark, she's helped communities and companies across the country with site selection, incentive strategy, and long-term economic planning. One of the projects she led was the Alliance Bernstein project that located in Nashville. Her work has supported billions in investment, tens of thousands of jobs, and major redevelopment projects nationwide. Kim is a frequent speaker in economic development. I've had the opportunity to hear her speak a number of times at conferences around the country. We're excited to have her and have her team here in Chattanooga this week. We are running them through the paces. So they are starting this morning with you at 7:30. They will be finishing with me and our board chair and incoming board chair, Dr. Ashford, this evening, probably sometime around 8 o'clock. So it's going to be a long day for them. They were here all day yesterday and here through Friday. So Kim, invite you up to the stage, and I'll turn it over to Kim and Janet. Thanks so much.
Charles, thank you very much for allowing me to be able to moderate this panel. First off, I would like to thank you again, Congressman Fleischman, for your presence here today, your remarks, and your continuous hard work, dedication, and support for Chattanooga. Thank you very much. And Dr. Altig, I always enjoy your economic outlook, and thank you for the lighthearted humor here and there to help not make it so scary for us, so appreciate that. But as Charles said, we really are here to talk about where are we at with competitiveness and where should we be? So I am so excited to be able to moderate or basically have a chat with Kim here today. And Kim's with Newmark. So for the audience, who is Newmark? Newmark is a global real estate and site selection firm. And the Chattanooga Chamber has, engaged Newmark so that they could do a competitive analysis of Chattanooga and Hamilton County. Kim, I don't know if you know, but Chattanooga here, we are extremely competitive. And not just for the state of Tennessee, but basically nationwide. And so for the audience, we've asked Newmark to do a competitive analysis on specific sectors of communities that are similar to ours. So those particular communities are Knoxville, Tennessee, Greenville, South Carolina, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Louisville, Kentucky. And so what Newmark is going to be doing out of this analysis is they're going to take a look and see, what kind of marketing and recruitment should we focus on, as well as evaluating some of our current incentive tools and resources and policies, and how can we take it up a notch, enhance that, and improve that. So with that, Kim, I'm going to ask at a very more broad level first, starting out the question, is what are the current big trends in the state of site selection and economic development?
So right now I would have to say foreign direct investment is at the top of the list. We've got a lot of companies that are looking at where their fact pattern should be in locations. You talked a lot about tariffs this morning. That has definitely impacted that. So we're looking, talking about competitiveness, your message has to be international. And so that's one of the things that we would just say is, you're good at it, you've done it before, you continue to do it. So strengthen that message through data so that you can make sure that you're speaking to those companies that not only come in the U.S. and grow, but come to the U.S. to grow. We're seeing an uptick in office. It's not what it used to be. It's not big, whales that are coming through for office projects, but we are starting to see an uptick in office. A lot of it's based around AI, and I think everybody gets caught up in the data center side of AI, which is also still blowing. It is the largest industrial client at the moment. But, they forget about the office side, the actual people who make AI, and that has to go into the data centers. So we're seeing a lot of uptick in that, but they are smaller footprints than what we were seeing, like an Alliance Bernstein project that had multitude of square foot and thousands of employees. So they're going to come a little smaller, but at least there are office projects coming in. They're very focused on flight to quality. So Class A, like it's one of those, like not even a list, is what they're looking for. Amenities nearby or in the building to support their staff. And, we're still struggling with the hybrid mentality. So a lot of trying to get people back to the office. So you'll still see some hoteling and different things like that in an office project. From an industrial standpoint, our projects are starting to reduce in size. They're not always the mega project that we've heard about nonstop for the last couple of years. We are getting back into those smaller manufacturing kind of types of situations, which is good because there is a huge demand on infrastructure. I love that you're interviewing me because you're probably the person we speak to most in our site selection projects are those dedicated to power.
Gotcha.
Everybody needs power, everybody needs more power, and there's just not enough power. So that is definitely something that's on the top of the list for all of our clients.
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing is the importance here is infrastructure, technology, and people.
Yes.
So let's talk about the why. Why is it important for community to enhance and look at their competitiveness?
Well, you're always competing. First of all, I want to start off with the fact that Chattanooga has always competed, and we actually use Chattanooga from your entrepreneurship's ecosystem as a best practice, even with our own recommendations. We have sent clients that we have done work for here to take a look at your entrepreneurship ecosystem. So I want to say that Chattanooga is competitive. Now, the question is you can't win if you don't know who you're playing against. That's why all sports teams watch film, right? You got to go see who you're playing against. You got to see what their strategy is. So what we try to do is take that strategy and align it with all of your assets in the region. And then we align it with the clients that we work with in what we call their critical location factors. So the deciding factors that they consider when they're looking for a new location. And we try to align that together. And then we say, these are the industries you should focus on, because you should be able to walk in and tell them your story, and that should make utter sense to a site selector who represents them or to the client themselves. And so our hope is that we'll be able to kind of narrow that in and give you some really quick wins.
Okay, so now let's focus in specifically to Chattanooga. I know that in the last few months, you've done tabletop analysis, and even within this week, you've had conversations with some key players. So, where are we at now?
So I would say, first of all, I would say some of these things are not going to be unique to Chattanooga. Some of these things are nationwide, almost even international in factor. But the first thing I would say is that, in order to site projects, you have to have sites. It's critically important. You have to have places for them to go. And it doesn't even mean just the big projects, that need 25 to 50 acres. This also impacts your entrepreneurs. They start in an incubator, they got to go to that next step, and then that next step you hope they go to, and you want to make sure that you have places for them to land so that they can continue to grow their small businesses. They go from startups to small businesses, hopefully to big businesses and unicorns, right? So that's what you're trying to grow. But you always have to have places for them to land. So having sites is critically important. You guys have a very unique asset, very unique. And we talked about this when we were just kind of prepping for this, and that is the quantum computing that you've brought to the table.
That's music to my ears.
So when we're looking at cities and we're talking to people, it's amazing how many times we get the same story from every city. My quality of life is fantastic, and your quality of life is fantastic, so don't jump me just yet. But but that's what everybody says, and so everybody has a pride in their community. Everybody believes that their community is wonderful, and most communities are wonderful. That's why everybody lives there. But you really have to have something that aligns, that makes you unique. And I would say your quantum computing capabilities make you absolutely unique right now. There's no one else that's this far ahead. And jumping on that as quickly as possible will just be a huge impact to this economy here. We were laughing because a couple of my teammates are here with me. They're from Chicago, and we've been looking at that. And Governor Pritzker has we counted this morning, $700 million into building a quantum area in Illinois. And you guys have already done it. And it didn't take $700 million, I don't think.
No, it did not. But we'll take $700 million.
But so that just shows the innovation that's here in Chattanooga, the drive that nobody's going to tell me no, and it's not impossible. And I think that that's a very good message for anybody, and then that is a very huge thing to jump on. And then, of course, I think pairing with the lifestyle that's here, the naturalist of it, I think there's some opportunities that would be able to come from that.
Yeah, and you mentioned Chicago, which is interesting because, sometimes nationwide when you talk about quantum, people think about Chicago Quantum Exchange, because they do a really good job with finding partnerships and kind of getting the word out. But reality is Chattanooga has real quantum infrastructure that is what really makes us stand out.
Absolutely.
And I've actually gotten a call from Chicago, and they say, can you please help mentor us because we want to put real infrastructure in Chicago as well. So I'm still debating whether or not to return that call. But, I think the audience would agree here that all of us here with the industry, we're all working together to keep Chattanooga on the cutting edge. And so innovation is a big part of that. But sometimes as a mid-city, mid-sized community, it's hard to compete with large metros, right? So what are your recommendations for somebody our size to be able to compete with larger communities?
So first of all, I'm going to jump with, you got to be louder. You've got a lot of things going on here, and you need to be telling your story bigger, better, and stronger. that would be my first recommendation, because you've got the infrastructure in here, not only, actual infrastructure, but just the infrastructure from that. So I would say that telling that story better, making very specific points, changing perceptions is critical at this point. Again, this is my first trip to Chattanooga, but I have been hearing Chattanooga's name for probably 30 years.
Wow.
Why? Because of the entrepreneurship ecosystem that was here. I remember coming into economic development, and they were already setting the bar very high. So you have a reputation already of that entrepreneurship that leads to innovation. That ecosystem brings in specific types of industries because they look for that. As somebody mentioned Alliance Bernstein, and when we were looking for locations, innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystems was a critical location factor for them. So if you didn't have it, we weren't able to look at you from that perspective. So I think getting back out there with the message of what's going on here, the innovation that's already happening here, hopefully the partnerships that are coming with higher education, I think are also going to help broaden and strengthen that message going forward, because that's going to start to talk to that people side of the business. But I do believe that you have already a good start on that, but it just has to be louder and a more directed message with specific data points to back it up.
Yeah, it's interesting that you heard about us 30 years ago. Quantum is a new thing now that is putting Chattanooga sort of on the map on that type of technology. But Chattanooga has actually been on the map for being the first gig city 15 years ago. So there's other innovation that Chattanooga has been known for as well. And you mentioned entrepreneurship. I think what's so neat about our community is we have a very high level of bringing a lot of companies to our community. So we have companies such as CoLab and Brickyard who are constantly bringing in new ideas, new company, new talent to our community here. So talk about incentives, right? So what do the role of incentive play in these discussions? Why is that important?
So a lot of people would say that incentives are the tiebreaker. They're the thing, the icing on the cake that makes the company help them make their decision. When we're in site selection, it's our job when we're trying to do this is to find two locations that a company could pretty much operate in either one of them successfully, and then they have to decide which one best fits that. Yes, sometimes incentives can edge them one way or the other, but it's really a risk mitigation factor. It shows many different things. One, it's a risk mitigation factor. Two, right now, construction costs and the actually investment that companies are having to put into their own infrastructure is growing by hundreds of millions of dollars. So these projects are really struggling to make sure that they get water, power, sewer, and putting that price tag on that. So this is incentives come in and they kind of offset that relocation cost. They kind of cushion that a little bit. That helps boards make decisions better. That helps people commit to those locations. And the other thing I would just say is people don't even realize this, but it's also a gesture of we want you. And that can be so meaningful to a CEO or to a boardroom when they're like, well, but these people really want us, and look at what they're putting on the table. But again, I think that it's a critical part of the decision-making factor. It's not the only, it's not the first, but it is a critical point to that. And again, it just helps them integrate into the community faster because they have a little bit of a cushion on their operating costs.
Yeah, so it has a little bit of a help to help them incentivize them there. Before I go to my final question, I want to see if we can take some audience questions. If there is any audience question, we'd be open to any questions if there is from the audience. Now, Kim, this is the first time you've been here in Chattanooga, right?
Yes.
They say that once you come, you don't leave. So I'm just saying you may not ever get back to Dallas. But I'm curious, we have great community, we have natural beauty here, and we also have, I'm a foodie, we have great restaurants. Which one of your favorite restaurants here?
So the first one we went to, and I hope I don't mispronounce it, but I think it's Old Gildman's.
Yeah.
It's just like right outside the door.
Yeah, really close by.
It was delicious. It was an amazing lunch. It was probably one of the best wedge salads I've ever had.
Wow.
And I think one of my teammates also agrees. But it was delicious. And but again, the food scene is really impressive here. my husband and I have a funny thing. I travel a lot for work, and he doesn't really think about where I go until after I've gone there, and then he texts me facts that he's figured out because he's Googling me like as I travel. And so last night, he does, and last night it was so funny because he's like, I've never really thought about Chattanooga, so I started Googling Chattanooga, and he said, man, the first thing you see is a beautiful picture of the Tennessee River. And I thought, it's just as pretty in person. And we actually had the conversation of, I think we're going to have to come back here.
Oh, good.
And so
I said, once you come, you don't leave. Yeah.
But it is the beauty of it and everything that's going on here, I think, is really unique. We talked a lot about the vacancy in downtown being like 5%. I mean, I come from Dallas, and unfortunately, our downtown is struggling. We have a very high vacancy rate in downtown. Chicago, or some of my teammates they're starting to make some inbounds, but it's still been a struggle. So everything that we're seeing in downtown is fantastic. And there's people there at night. There's people on the streets walking around, going to the restaurants. We have some places that haven't even been able to reopen because they haven't had that.
And so part of my reason of asking this question is, EPB also tries to help with economic development because we have infrastructure. So we encourage people to come to Chattanooga. And there was a company that we were in discussion with, and they were in UK, and they're wanting to open up an office in the US. Tennessee was one of the sites that they were looking at, but they were debating between Knoxville, Nashville, and Chattanooga. And one of the questions that they asked me is, if we come to Chattanooga, what is the quality of life here? Can we get people to come work for us, but can the people enjoy where they want to live? So it's important to also look at, sort of the lifestyle that we have here, the nature, restaurants offering all that. So it all ties into the overall package, right? So ending with my final question is an outlook from a site selector perspective. What do you see as challenges and opportunities ahead for us?
So one I would say is, again, you need talent, you need skilled talent. Everybody does. It's not, again, something that is unique to you, but it has to be a sustainable pipeline. So what starts with either people relocating for a job coming from somewhere else, which is great, but you would want to establish that pipeline growing here locally. So, making sure that the programs at the universities align with what the businesses need, the tech schools align with what your manufacturers need, and it even builds down into K through 12 education, that they've got career pathways, knowing that they're feeding into this economy. It's so often we hear that, my kids leave and go to college and then there's no jobs for them to return to. And that's definitely not something we see as an option here, but you have to continue to provide those opportunities for them. So that it would be one thing I would say is, making sure that your pipeline of talent is sustainable, so goes all the way back down to kindergarten. The second piece I would say is the opportunity, again, around quantum. I think it's a finite window. Unfortunately, everybody's going to start to catch on and catch up. And so this is your chance to kind of jump ahead of everybody else. So lean into that as much as possible. We've even, I'm not going to give you a sneak preview, but I think, a lot of our target industries that we're going to be helping you focus on really do align to your culture and your quality of life and the way that things are, because we think that is a very great message to send. So why not build upon that, right? If this is a very healthy and active and outdoor community, how do you align the culture of the businesses to also work within that same mindset?
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Kim, and thank you for your analysis of where Chattanooga is and where we can go forward with that. So I just want to thank you for our community to be able to see the analysis and how we can work on that. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Janet and Kim. You can tell we've got a lot of work to do again. They've been running hard this week. I do want to thank everyone for coming out this morning. We have a packed house, if you didn't notice. And if we thought you were going to have open seats, we asked you if we could fill them. So for those of you that allowed us to put some other folks at your table, thank you for that. I will tell you, I am so excited about the future of EPB. I think that Janet is going to bring tremendous energy to an organization that has been a game changer for Chattanooga, and such a good partner when it comes to economic development. So really excited to have Janet play that role in the future. And again, thank you for Kim and the team from Newmark for all their work, their wisdom, and their insight that they're bringing to us. I do, again, want to thank the city and the county and Benwood Foundation, which are helping underwrite a lot of that work and that research that's going to help us. And then, of course, we're going to ask for others. There's a host of folks that are involved this week in that process, and we will be asking others, not the least of which are our local government partners, to help us on this journey as we try and make Chattanooga very competitive into the future. We've been tremendously competitive, over the last 4 decades. And for us, I love the fact that Kim shared the analogy around sports teams and what they do. Right? They look at the film. And they look at our competitors. And while I know not everyone loves Nick Saban, he has a great line, which is success is rented, right? And so I think as we're thinking about how we make sure that we're competitive in the future, we've got to remember that, right? It's all about what's the next play. It's not about what we did in the last play, it's about what's the next play. And so success is rented. So bear with us as we work through that effort. Please be a partner in that work. Again, I want to thank Dr. Altig and his team. They've been here every year, and I appreciate a lot of the deep dive into the data. I'm kind of a data nerd on this stuff, so this is always one of my favorite events that we put on every year, and appreciate him and the Atlanta Fed for playing a role in that. I do want to thank our sponsors. I particularly want to thank Hamp Johnson and Rockpoint Bank. If you guys, while we're on the sports analogy, if you know what a clutch player is, Hamp is that clutch player on our executive committee at the Chamber. So appreciate him and his team jumping in to support us on this event, and all of our other sponsors that have been tremendous help for us as we do our events. I do want to also thank our Chamber team. I particularly want to thank Melissa Wallace, who's here and has led our Chamber events for a long time. She is going to be stepping down from work at the Chamber. She's going to continue to help us with the Chattanooga Regional Manufacturers Association. And we've got a couple other folks that'll move into some of those roles. So we'll continue to have great events, but I do want to thank Melissa in particular for all her hard work over the last 8 years. She started with us as an intern, and so really appreciate that, and the rest of the Chamber staff and team that make these events happen. Last thing is, I'll put in a plug for my friends, our partners and friends with Leadership Chattanooga. We cannot build a thriving Chattanooga without great leaders. And so the nomination process is open for Leadership Chattanooga. It is incredibly competitive. Our goal is to have 300 nominations that get us down to 45 people that are in the best class ever. And so if you haven't put in a nomination yet, please do that. Excited to lead that program and have that be a part of the Chamber. And with that, I will just say thanks again for everyone coming out early this morning. We hope this was a great event for you. Excited to have you all here. And again, thank the DeFore Brothers Hospitality for hosting us at the Westin. Thanks so much.